Welcome to episode 3 of Care to Share, the podcast for anyone in the care sector who thinks deeply about retention, well-being, and quality of care. Today, we're diving into what it takes to achieve an outstanding rating from the CQC and how quality and well-being go hand in hand. I'm really excited to introduce our guest today, Sultana Pasha. Sultana has an impressive track record with the care sector. She served 8 years as a CQC inspector, gaining invaluable insights into what it takes to make care services excel. And in the 6 years since, she supported 14 care services to achieve the outstanding rating. Sultana is now director of her own consulting group and is a director of quality for Kin, a luxury care home. She specialises in conducting mock inspections and provides support to care providers and managers to help them understand the challenges around CQC compliance. So, Sultana, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to see you, Elan.
Good to see you too. How are you doing?
Yes, very well, thank you. Busy with all the changes with CQC, trying to keep on track and understand what CQC are now thinking. But yes, busy time.
Yeah. Okay, so look, question 1. You spent 8 years with the CQC, and since then you've helped 14 care services reach outstanding. What's the easiest thing that most homes can do to reach outstanding?
Easiest thing for them to do is align their processes. So what CQC are auditors, and what they do is they review your policies. They read your policies, they understand what your promises are, because when you complete your initial SOPs, your initial registration, you make a promise and you say to CQC, the commissioners, this is the level of care we're going to provide and this is how we're going to provide it. So when CQC come in and do an inspection on you, they are holding you to account on what your promises were. So when you fill in your PIR every year, for example, you inform them of what you've been doing. So when the auditor comes in, the inspector, who is the auditor, they look at your policies, they look at your procedures, and they say, okay, are you following them? So it's a very simple process. If you are following what you've said you're doing, if you're, for example, complaints policy states that you are responding to complaints in a good time, maybe it's 21 working days, maybe it's 30 working days, maybe if you go over that time, you will inform the person it's going to take longer. As long as you're following your own process, your inspector doesn't have a problem with that. So it's all about following what you've said you're going to do.
Okay, so then does that lead, so the incentive is follow your process. Does that lead to people doing one of two things, either making bigger promises to look good that they then can't keep, or actually making very poor promises so that they check all the boxes?
Yeah. One of the key things I find when I go to services is there are a lot of, you can buy policies off the internet, and a lot of people buy them because they're very standard policies. But the actual people who are implementing those policies haven't fully understood them, haven't read them. So you've got a policy in place. It's like having an instruction manual, but never reading it, and then pressing all the buttons on and dials and trying to figure things out. You know, we all do it. But the key thing is when you are putting these policies and procedures in place, have you read them? Have you understood them? And have you shared them? And are you making sure that everybody within your service, so it's not about one person, I've written the policies, I've reviewed it, I understand it, but what about the other 100 people that are working in my service who are actually doing the role every single day? Do they understand what the process is and what they need to do?
What's stopping people from understanding these policies properly?
I think the biggest challenge for any provider out there is as soon as you go through registration, you get clients coming in, you're busy, you know, because fundamentally on a daily basis within a care service, every day is different. You might come in planning to work on your audits, working on your processes. Today is the day I'm going to review and make sure we are CQC compliant. And something happens, you're a care provider, you know, there's an outbreak in the home. Suddenly you have to drop everything and you have to go and deal with that risk that's happening within the home. You have sickness come in, you've got to suddenly run around trying to find staff. If you're a domiciliary care provider, you don't want any missed visits, any cancelled visits. So you're now running around having. So the biggest challenge in that every day is different. You cannot sit there and plan like other companies out there, other organizations, where your day is structured, whatever is happening, generally your day stays the same. Within care, anything can happen. You have a resident who was fine yesterday, and today they've deteriorated. You've got to bring in the family, you've got to bring in the MDTs, you've got to think about your requirements when it comes to their care plans, their risk assessments, your team, medication. Suddenly, do you bring in the GP and the medication is changing? There's so much that can change in 24 hours that people can't always keep up with it. And that's the difficult thing for if CQC walk through the door on that same day and they're asking you, so what are you doing? It's one of the biggest challenges for an organization is balancing that out, balancing the risk and balancing that situation.
Yeah. Okay. So, because the irony is that like people are busy trying to provide the best quality of care they can, and sometimes it means that they then run out of time to read the policies that would help them provide a great quality of care. So
Exactly.
yeah. Okay. That's. I, I don't want to talk too much about my stuff, but that's I think that's why Progresso's been resonating with people, is because by letting people access their policy in a conversational way on WhatsApp, it doesn't feel like a big lift. It's just a quick message of, can you remind me about the chain of infection? Or can you remind me where I should be putting this and labeling that? And then to have an answer back that's conversational is just so much easier to take the knowledge in rather than reading. Because what I found is just the policy documents are so dense that people also don't want to read them, and I find that it's like they put them off.
Yeah, and the other thing is when you're going through maybe an intense situation, everyone reacts differently. And I've seen when I was a CQC inspector, really strong managers who have managed and they're shaking because the nerves have kicked in and suddenly you can't think, where do I go for that? Where do I go for this? And what I liked when I tried your system was the fact that I'm on my phone and I can say, okay, God, I can't remember what one part of the policy states. So I can ask the question and it's given me my answers straight away. So I'm not having to log on to another system. I'm not having to go to something. I can literally get that information and it's the current information that I'm getting. So it makes me feel more confident in myself. And it also means, as a manager, it's not just the manager that has access to all of this or quick access, because a lot of these platforms are on the desktop rather than on the handheld devices. So again, your team have access to that information. So actually, for example, if CQC are coming round and they need a reminder around whistleblowing safeguarding because, oh God, the inspector's going to ask me and my mind is going to go blank, they can type it in and say, right, can you give me some reminders on what I need to say? Because we do that, and you might have gone through years of safeguarding training, years of whistleblowing training, but that moment when that inspector's sitting in front of you, your mind goes blank, So it happens to the best of us.
Yeah. Okay, so we spoke about what's the easiest thing providers can do to reach outstanding. What's the most difficult thing?
I think, is putting in a culture within your service where every single person is pushing towards outstanding. It's not enough for a provider, a leadership team to want outstanding, because if you look at the CQC regulations, if you look at what CQC is really pushing for, they do look at the management team. They look at, say, compassionate leaders, for example, but all the other quality statements are working towards the team and how the team are working. Risk assessments, care plans, that's all part of your team. So the people who are on the floor, the people who are delivering the care are the ones that need to want outstanding. They're the ones who want to go the extra mile every day. They're the ones who want to showcase to the inspectors, look at us. We're doing such exceptional work. We're supporting people to change their lives. We're supporting people to have, a dignified life. They're the ones. And that's sometimes one of the hardest things, because you've got to embed that. It's not something that can just happen overnight. It can take years to bring people, because within care, we have such a turnover of people coming in as well. So you might train a whole cohort of staff around outstanding and managers around, and bring them on this journey. And before you know it, they've moved to another location and you're having to start again. So you really have to embed. And the way that works is, and one of the great things that CQC have now done is with the new quality statements, is they're now recognizing staff wellness as well. So staff wellbeing, wellness falling under caring now. So whereas before caring was all about your residents and how you're looking after your residents, within the Chloe for caring, now they're saying, okay, how are you looking after your residents? Are you treating them with dignity? But actually, how are you looking after your staff? Are you making sure that they're okay? Because finally, they're recognizing that if you have a workforce that is well, is being treated well, is feeling engaged, then that will naturally flow through to the care and treatment of your residents. Okay, so if your team want to be there, if your team are doing well, their mental health is doing well, their own physical health is doing well, then they can deliver the care, the outstanding care that you need. So that's one of the key things, is bringing your team on board. But you start with that by treating your team well. And that's what CQC are now saying. Treat them well.
Yeah. And interestingly, like you said, you want to shift the culture so everybody's on board with outstanding. And then also, to get the skill set up, you need to retain the staff. You can't keep teaching people from scratch if you want to reach outstanding. So yes, so that's why the CQC have got it right. When you start to look after your staff and you retain your staff, the quality of care goes up for everybody.
Yeah, which is why CQC, when they come out and do your inspections, they'll ask you for your staff surveys. Yeah, because they're looking at, it's not just you doing a staff survey. What did you analyze it? Did you look at what people were saying from that survey? And what did you actually do? So if your survey results compared from last year have dropped by 5-10%, and the comments that are being put on are in relation to staffing hours or in relation to staff well-being, what did you do as a provider to then reduce that risk of people moving? And they'll look at your turnover. They'll say, well, actually, look, your staff engagement, and how many people did actually bother to fill in that, your survey? Because if you've got 50 staff, but only 15 filled in the survey, then that's telling you something as well. So CQC are going to look at that already. They've been looking at that for years.
So your surveys are also similar to your policies in the way that when you ask the question in the survey, you are making a promise that we're going to address your answer. And so if you're not addressing the answer, it's the same way you're not addressing the policy, and you won't be an outstanding provider.
You won't. If you're a tick box company, which is just about, right, tick, done a survey, tick, done a resident survey, that's not what CQC want. It's not a tick box exercise. The whole point is you've done something, but there needs to be an output from it. Everything requires an output. When you do an audit, there should be an output from it. How are you learning? It's continuous improvement. It's continuous learning. And everything that you do as a provider, you should be learning continuously.
How many surveys should a provider do a year?
There is no requirement. It all depends on your policy, on what your policy says. So some services might do an annual survey. Some services might say, actually, we want to do it twice a year, or we want to do it quarterly. Some services might say, well, actually, we feel that there's, a bit of a challenge going on, or something's changing. We need to keep a constant update and we need to monitor what's happening. when I was talking to you about your system as well, I was saying how it's great that with the coach, people can interact with the coach, and by interacting, you as a provider kind of can identify buzzwords and see what words are being used, and how maybe if people are using the word stress more, or if people are using certain or asking about certain things, that could trigger on the dashboard to say, oh, there's a lot of these conversations happening. So actually, as a provider, do you need to now start thinking, right, do we need to do some mental health workshops with the team? Do we need to do so? It could be finance. It could be something to do with financial challenges, with the budget coming out and things. People are worried, and it could be around, childcare, understanding what are my rights around childcare. You don't want a really experienced staff member to leave because childcare was a problem. Yeah, that could have been a conversation that was had. That could have been a process that needed to be followed, where you retain the staff members and you also are able to meet their needs as well. So it's a win-win from both sides. So a system where you're able to constantly, rather than waiting for once a year, 3 times a year, constantly be surveying what is happening with your employee mindset, and then you being able to put in the actions that are needed to then reduce the risk of people going, or even not even going, the way in which your staff start behaving as well. Because if you have staff who are not engaged in their everyday work and are just turning up, then you're not going to have good care. You're not going to have outstanding care being provided. So if you're able to pick that up through this constant review process, you can then nip it in the bud very quickly and deal with those situations as well.
Yeah, and it gives so it gives the care provider a chance to be proactive, because so many times I hear managers talking about putting out fires. Like you said earlier, with learning the policies, there's just things to do every day that they got to keep on top of. But when you can keep on top of how your staff feel and what they're currently focused on, if half your team have decided to do a stress management course on Progresso, there's some stress that needs to be managed.
Exactly. Something's going on, and then that's where you have those conversations, and where you've got multiple homes as well. You might see that there's a certain challenge happening. So you may have a new manager come in, and suddenly the interactions are changing between the staff and Progresso, and those conversations are changing. So very quickly as a provider that we need to put more support in, or we need to maybe the manager needs to have some more coaching around the organization values and the way the organization works. There are different things, but then at the same time, you can see those homes where, yeah, we actually might get outstanding here because things are doing really well, staff are doing well, there's a lot of support going in, and we're going to do well in this one. So as a provider, it allows you to have that information at hand.
So talk to me a bit about your mock inspections. Why do people let me think.
Why do they want to have me come in and tell them what's wrong?
So you do these mock inspections for care providers. What's the real value people get from these?
So especially with CQC have not been out for a very long time. Some services, they haven't been out for 8 years. They may have had a historical outstanding, they may have a historical requires improvement or inadequate. And they're sitting there saying, well, we've put in all of this really good work, but where do we sit? Now, what you don't want, it's like when you sit exams, you do your mocks first because you want to know where you are, because you don't want to wait for the final exam and then realize that something's gone wrong. Because again, a lot with the way CQC are working now, it's risk-based. Okay, so they only go out to a service where there is a risk, okay, where there's an increased number, there's noise coming from that service. So a lot of providers are now saying, actually, we need somebody to come in and tell us where we sit. You need to tell us where those gaps are so we can plug them. When I do a mock inspection, and I, I will find, those people who have worked with me know that I will find something. But the whole reality is, and I say to people, rather I find it than the inspector finds it. Okay. And if I find it, I will give you the guidance on how to fix it. Whereas an inspector will not. They're not obliged to give you the pointers. Some are quite nice, and they will say, oh, try this, but they can't officially tell you how to fix anything. They will find what's wrong and they will report on what's wrong. I will, on the other hand, will report it to the provider, but at the same time work with them and say, right, now this is how we can fix it. This is how. And because I've had such a great career where I've been able to work with so many different providers, I've seen the best and the worst that care has to offer. I'm able to tailor it according to the service and say, right, try this. And I've got such a great network of people like yourself where I can say, well, actually, yeah, why not try this? Why not try this? And really give that personal view on where I've seen improvement for services as well.
And having been on the inside with the CQC, it must just be so valuable for people to have that reassurance. It's like, it sort of reminds me of taking your driving test when you're with your instructor and they talk you through everything. But when it comes to your driving exam, you make a mistake and you just see them go, just write that down. You're like, no, I've missed it. Yeah. Something that was avoidable if they'd had the mock.
Exactly. And what I think is so important for providers to remember, and I did a conference a few weeks ago, and I'll be doing one in a couple of weeks as well. And they said, so how do we know what to do? Because with CQC being the way they are at the moment, they're not sure whether they're going to score or not, and what recommendations are going to come out. And I said, look, put the quality statements to the side. Okay, put everything to the side. The regulations have not changed. Okay, so the requirements for CQC is for you to meet the regulations. So let's just take it back. Let's take it back to where it all started. Let's take it back to the regulations. Make sure you're meeting the requirements for the regulations. Make sure you are going above and beyond when it comes to your clients, and make sure that you are documenting, because an auditor, which is what the inspector is, will only go by what is written down, not by what you say. You can tell as many stories as you want, but they'll say, okay, where's the evidence of that? You can't, So have your evidence available, be prepared. And remember, go back to the regulations. Always make sure that you are compliant with the regulations. As long as you're compliant with the regulations, that is your inspection at good. When an inspector walks into your service, you're rated good. Now, depending on what they find during that day, you either go up or you go down, or you remain at good. Okay? And that is in your control as a provider. Because if you've done all the processes, you've made sure that all your audits or your care plans or your risk assessments, everything is as it should be, your staff are happy, your policies are up to date, then you've met that good. Okay, then for you to get outstanding is where you go the above and beyond and you evidence that to the inspector. You can't just sit there and tell them stories for the last 5 years. You tell them the stories, but you back it up with evidence as well. You can't sit there and say, all my staff are really happy and engaged and everything. And then you pull out a staff survey and the staff survey says something completely different. You have to be able to evidence that as well, to say, yeah, our staff. And when they speak to your staff as well, they need to be able to, your staff need to say that as well. If you're using a system like Progresso, if you're telling your inspector about this great system, your staff should be using it, because they'll say, oh, we heard about this system, now show it to us, tell us what it does. And your staff should be like, let me tell you about this system that we're using. Yeah, your team should be the one, like I said earlier, your team are the ones that should want outstanding. So they're the ones that should say, all right, inspector, come over here, let me show you this, let me tell you about this. They're the ones who are going to get you outstanding. A care provider can want outstanding and can throw a lot of money into getting outstanding, but fundamentally, it's your team who are going to get you that outstanding.
So there is a lot of turbulence going on in the CQC at the moment. What do you think is really happening there?
Lots of people leaving.
Yeah.
What is happening there? I think the issue is that obviously a process was put in place. When I worked at CQC, I used to say the people in the glass offices are making decisions, and it was people who hadn't inspected before, people who do not know. And a lot of times within CQC, you can have situations where it's somebody coming from a completely different industry who's a project manager or dealing with change management and has put in a process. We are not an industry where you can just move something from, I don't know, banking or a corporate industry and plug it into care. We're not dealing with products and we're dealing with a service. We're dealing with people at their most vulnerable. So the rule book goes out the window. You can't sit there and create these rules through different, models that you've looked at. You have to deal with what's actually happening on the ground. The nature of care at the moment, if I compare it to when I joined the CQC so many years ago, to when the first time I walked into a care home, the type of care home I walked into, and now the type of care homes that I see, the type of residents that you have, we have a multicultural number of residents. Whereas, 15 years ago, if you walked in a care home, you would not find a mix of residents at all. It would be one type of residents and that was it. And the care was tailored to that. Activities were tailored to that. I always say when I go into homes and there's celebrations or there's events around Halloween and VE Day and things like that. And then I say, but look at the demographics of your residents today. And actually, does that match? Are they interested in what you are? Because what you're doing is pulling forward what worked before, but that doesn't necessarily work for, when I go into a care home, do I want to listen to, watch My Fair Lady on the cinema? Probably not. I'm going to watch Avengers. I'm going to want to do things like that because I've grown up with that. I want to listen to Take That. I don't want to listen to the old time music. So it's adapting because when I go into care homes now, I meet residents who are my age because that's the reality of it. People are going into care who need that care, but you have to be able to adapt. And when CQC are looking at you, they're saying, okay, if you've assessed somebody and you've said we can meet their needs, so you've assessed Sultana and you've said, okay, we can meet her cultural, her spiritual, her emotional needs, and she can move into our home. You can't then say, oh, well, we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't do that. Or we don't have the right staff or the right training or the right systems and processes. That's not good enough. That's not an outstanding, that's not even a good service for you to do that.
Very interesting. Something that's come up a lot lately is the demographic of staff and whether or not we have enough. So do you think we have enough young carers in the industry?
I mean, with the recent change, we've got a lot of staff coming in. I've found a lot of young staff. Have we got staff who I think we could move towards pushing people to do health and social care qualifications. So with colleges, universities, really pushing people and showcasing that actually there is a career to be had within care. A lot of people do think, you're going to be put into a certain area and you're going to be a carer and that's it. There's no career progression. There is a career progression, anyone can go into care. It's possible. Yeah. Anyone can go into care. Anybody can be part of it, but I believe it takes a specific type of person to be in care. Look, my degree was in business, so I'm a business minded person, but I did find that actually I have that compassion to sit with somebody and recognize that they are at their most vulnerable, and to actually, want to make sure that I'm safeguarding them on a daily basis. So it's a very different thing. So you don't necessarily have to have started within health and social care. Okay, but you need to have that certain type of person. But I think we should try and work more with colleges and universities to say that, look, there are these management opportunities, there are these, apprenticeships. Apprenticeships is a great thing. And to support people to do apprenticeships within health and social care, and say, actually, you can become an amazing leader through going through apprenticeship program. You can start as a carer, but you can work your way up. And actually, some of the best managers out there are the ones that started off in care. I've met people who started in the kitchens, supporting with, the general cooking, or supporting the chef. And now they're at regional level, they're at management level, because they've just excelled, because everybody is a specialist in their field. And that's a very important thing. Whenever I speak to staff, I always try and empower them and say, I couldn't do what you're doing. A carer is a specialist in their field. A housekeeper is a specialist in their field. I wish I could get my taps as shiny as some of the taps I see in care homes. Yeah, they're specialists. They know exactly what they're doing. They can progress within their careers as well, because they learn, and it's a knowledge sharing exercise that they have to follow.
Okay, so as we wrap up, I'm going to do a quick fire round of questions for you. If you can answer them in one sentence, amazing. But they might be bigger questions, but we'll see how we get on. Okay. What's the number one trait of an outstanding care home?
Engagement and strong leadership. And when I say strong leadership, it is a leader who brings their team with them. So lead by example. Some of the most outstanding homes that I've seen is where you will never find the manager in their office.
Okay.
Because that's not where they belong. They belong on the floors, understanding what's happening, the challenges, the daily challenges, speaking to their staff and knowing exactly what's happening in their home.
What's a common myth about CQC inspections you'd like to debunk?
Key myth is you can't get an outstanding on your first inspection. You can get an outstanding. It is hard. It's not easy. Obviously, if you've only been open 11, 12 months, it is hard. There's a lot of services out there that have been open for 4 or 5 years who have not been rated by CQC. You can get a CQC outstanding. However, you need to ensure that you have all of your evidence together and you can show consistent care. And it's not one-trick ponies. You have to have a portfolio of evidence available to show what you've been doing over a sustained period of time to ensure that people's outcomes are celebrated within your service as well. So that is a big myth that it is not true.
And if you could change one thing about the care sector overnight, what would it be?
If there's one thing I would change, it would be this fear that people have of CQC. I think because I've been CQC, and I do try and say to people, look, I'm an inspector, hopefully you feel I'm approachable. I wish people didn't fear them. CQC, providers, they pay a subscription. They are their customers. Okay, and we need to remind ourselves that we are CQC's customers. We've made a promise to our clients, but CQC has made a promise to us as well. And I wish people would remember that.
In one sentence, what does an outstanding care home manager do that others don't?
Engages with all aspects of their service, from housekeeping all the way to maintenance, and ensures that their residents, their families, and their staff families form a whole world within the home.
What's the biggest threat to the care sector today?
Biggest threat is funding. Funding is the biggest threat. Unfortunately, it does cost a lot to run a care provider, even if it's a domiciliary service, if it's a care home. gas bills, electric bills, like they increase for us. If you imagine in a care home, when it comes to fuel and staff pay, all of these things, a care provider goes through the same costs, but they have a duty of care to their residents. So if they don't get paid, or if the local authority takes too long, or commissioners take too long to pay invoices, it's not like, your Sky subscription where it gets switched off. You have a duty of care. So you have somebody living in your home, you have somebody in the community that you're providing care to. You can't just stop because you're not getting paid. So unfortunately, funding is I see it across many sectors where there are care providers out there working at a loss because they care. And I think that's something that, I think local authorities and commissioners really need to reflect on, because they think that these are businesses, but these are people who are, are sustaining families as well and looking after the most vulnerable people in our communities.
And there's very little you can do about the price of gas, but when it comes to retaining staff, if you can do a better job of that, you can save a heck of a lot of money.
Exactly. And I'm sure many providers out there would rather pay their staff better than have to pay so much on, and this should be something the government should look at that, because we have some amazing staff around, and a lot of them work so many long hours and don't get paid for it because they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart. Many services I find where people are going in on their days off just because they want to sit and spend time with their residents, or they're going out to buy milk and bread out of their own money because that's, there's a lady in the community that they want to help. We have some outstanding people that work for us, but I think the government needs to look after them as well.
All right. Well, look, thank you very much for your time today. They were really, really insightful answers. And I think a lot of people will get a lot of value from those. So I really appreciate it.